there's more details all around in the Jewish record. It says, Noah went and took a wife, and he chose Naamah, the daughter of Enoch, and she was 580 years old. And if you remember, Noah's kind of related to Enoch, so that's kind of weird by our standards. And Noah took three daughters of Eliakim, son of Methuselah, for wives for his sons, and the Lord had commanded Noah. So his sons were taking wives from his family too, which is weird by our standards. And the sons of Tiras were Bened, Jerah, the Purion, and Galek. And these were the sons of Japheth according to their families, and their numbers in those days were about 460 men. And Terah, which is Abraham's father, took a wife, and her name was Amthelo, the daughter of Cornebo. All these extra details in Jasher that are not in Scripture. I think it's an interesting thought, I just now had it, that at the time that this would have been written, if it was forged back in the 1600s or the 1500s or anywhere after the Jewish law, after Jesus sometime, why would they add this incest into the text? There's all kinds of incest in there, and that's against Jewish law. Why would they add that in there? It makes sense. Anyway, there were interactions you might not have suspected, which is when Abram came out of the cave, he went to Noah and his son Shem, who were still around, and he remained with them to learn their instruction of the Lord and his ways. And no man knew where Abram was. And Abram served the Lord and Shem, his son, for a long time. So when you do the math, these dates do work out. The relationships between them work out. I don't see any contradictions. So if Jasher was written after Genesis, then why did they add detail, irrelevant detail? I don't know. All the dates and relationships are consistent. It was written from oral tradition, and you'd expect to see way fewer numbers and names. So either it was made up or it was handed down at the time. So you could take it or leave it. It would make sense, though, if something like this was a source that Moses used to compile Genesis. Maybe not this exact source. Maybe it hasn't come through time unscathed. But they probably did have some sources kind of like this back at the time when Genesis was compiled. All right, let's talk about some of the more outrageous claims of the Jewish record. Of course you can't believe the Jewish record because they had a flood, a global flood. That's just ridiculous. You can't believe that. Well, the flood is in records across the world in a bunch of different pagan mythologies. And some people complain about incest. Well, you know, Sarah was Abram's sister. Come on. He wouldn't marry his sister. It was a half-sister. Well, incest was in other religions at that time, too. The pagan Zeus married his sister Hera, and Cronus married his sister Rhea. And they were pretty closely related. I mean, Cronus was the father of Zeus, right? So you got, you make all kinds of family relationships. I'm my own grandpa, you know. Long lives. Now this is a little bit harder to show, but in the next couple slides I think I will. Long lives are in the other records too. All right, so you got Ages of Kings. This is from Eusebius writing on the Egyptians. He said, the total time which the Egyptians assigned to the gods and demigods and spirits is 24,900 lunar years, which is equivalent of 2,206 solar years. If you compare this figure with the chronology of the Hebrews, you'll find that almost the same number of years. So the Egyptians and the Hebrews have the same number of years, almost. According to the Hebrews, there were only 2,242 years, which is about 30 years more in all from Adam until the flood. So a lot of cultures actually have the time from what we call Adam to Noah, and they all kind of say it was 10 kings, and it was about, they all lived a long time. And it's pretty consistent through all these pagan mythologies. All right, this quote is not from an ancient source, well, as ancient. It's from Travels of Noah into Europe, which is more like 16-something, 1601, I think. And some people say that this guy used unreliable sources, but most of them were verified as I went through the sources that he wrote about. But it says, this is their goddess Isis, who is at least 450 years old, as she that was born in the first year of the reign of Semiramis, the queen of Babylon, and lived the whole at least 616 years, for she was living after the first destruction and desolation of Troy, as almost all writers have delivered in their opinions to the same purpose and effect. So he's saying that everybody said that Isis lived at least 50 years, 450. And this is from Josephus. And he was trying to defend his Jewish record, because Josephus was a Jewish author back around the time of Christ, shortly after Jesus. It says, now I have for witnesses to what I have said, all those who have written antiquities, both among Greeks and barbarians, for even, and then he lists 11 sources, relate that the ancients lived 1,000 years. But as to these matters, let everyone look upon them as he sees fit. It would be so easy for the Jews just to change their record to more reasonable dates, but they didn't. They just kept them unreasonable. Make us put faith in it, you know. All right, so let's put it all together. How is paganism connected to Judaism? All right, the nations were named for their ancestors. This is the whole premise of everything in this speech, and the premise of my book. This is what Isaac Newton said. He said, for it was hitherto in the fashion of the Eastern nations to deify their founders of their kingdoms. And you see that all through these nations. You see in the Jewish culture, you have the sons of Levi, which were the Levites, and the sons of Israel, who were the Israelites. Canaan, Canaanites. Sons of Shem is Semite. Eber, Hebrew. Aram, Aramaic. Moab, and Ammon. Interesting thing about Moab and Ammon, they were sons of Lot and his daughters. So that was a funny relationship too. I read in a couple places, but I couldn't find it for this speech tonight. But I did read that Adam actually had a prophecy that he sent with Noah onto the ship with a couple of big tablets or something, one in steel and one in stone or something. And it was supposed to be that the earth would be destroyed by water once and by fire once. And so when the earth was destroyed by water and Noah survived, came down to Lot, and he was living in a city that was destroyed by fire. And so you can kind of excuse the guy for trying to repopulate the earth when he thought that everything was gone. But that's just speculation. I don't know how reliable that source is, because I couldn't find it again. And from regular history from Europe, you have Brutus was the founder of Britain. There's a big old thing about Brutus. You can read for days on Brutus. Egyptus for Egypt, Romulus for Rome, and I don't think any of these are really objected by historians. Hispelus for Spain. This is kind of a funny name. It's Ethiopius or something. It kind of sounds like Ethiopia. But I read that somewhere. And Helen, which in a different language, Greece is called Hellas. And Troy, which is where the Trojan War happened. Tros was the guy that started Troy, because he was the founder or the king. Usually if you're the oldest in the family, you become the king, unless your kid overthrows you, like happened with Uranus and Cronus. So just about every nation in history starts out roughly the same time. It does seem, even from a secular perspective, that nations and civilizations just sprung up all at the same time in history. There wasn't a very big gap to bridge. Once nations started showing up, they showed up with a vengeance. And they're all just about the same time. All right, summary. Paganism was everywhere. Early man celebrated their early kings and ancestors by naming the days and months after them. And there are similarities between gods of different cultures. The name often being the only discernible difference. The language change. And the flood account is in cultures everywhere, and the Jewish record is more detailed and more reliable than the other early histories. The Jews were not the only culture to attribute long life to their ancestors, and we have the names of those who started the nations. Many of those nations revered their ancestors as gods. And I'm going to get into that last sentence when I get to some of these sources that I've used to learn all this stuff.